Hey guys.
Hello.
Hey Christos. Hey Maria. Well, I would like to introduce you a bit more. Well, Christos is the developer advocate, fan of open source, and manager of Microsoft Identity Project, a Microsoft Identity Project, right?
Yes, that's
Oh,
absolutely right. I'm a program manager for Microsoft Identity.
okay, great. We are really glad to see you here. And also, as far as I see, you have described that you're dad, husband, blogger, and all-around geek. That's so nice, so cute.
That's true. Not in the right order, but I tend to wear lots of hats and I like to geek out. So in my spare time, I do a lot of tinkering with code and having around with open source stuff and helping the community to become better and spend time with the kids and the family. Yeah.
Great. That's amazing that you have time for all of this stuff. Maria is our expert today. She used to work in a lot of different business fields, from startup about historical photography and large medical institutions, and currently she works in online education project. So Maria, I just wanted to ask you, how did you get that in such different fields, different business fields? How did it happen?
So it's the nature of EPAM. So you get different projects. You are assigned to very different fields, and that's something that I like about it, because it also allows you to wear a lot of different hats and like almost be professional in all the different fields. So yeah, it's so much fun.
Okay, great. Christos, and I just wanted to ask you that, as far as I understand, you live in Seattle, so you have a huge time difference. How do you feel in such an early morning making a talk?
I am an early person, so I don't mind getting up early and doing this. We usually start our day at 7 because my team is quite spread out around the world. We have a lot of people in Europe. So many meetings are at 8. That means I have to get up early and have breakfast with the family before I jump into my office and do work. So technically, I'm in my element. I'm really comfortable at this time of the day.
I've actually heard you say that you are the one who is super cheerful in the mornings, like toxic positivity. How do you manage that?
Yes.
Because the morning is the time when I want to die most of the time. Coffee.
Coffee.
Okay,
I
that's the
run on
secret.
coffee. I get my dose of coffee and then I'm good to go. Yeah,
Okay,
that's
great.
the
Maybe
secret.
then we are good to go.
Anytime you want, I'm here and ready to go. So good start. Yeah, cool. And I will start with Dobry den, Druze. It's nice to be here. Thank you for joining my session. Today, I'm going to be talking about security and identity. And although I work for Microsoft and I work for Microsoft Identity, I am slightly biased towards our products. Leaving my session, ideally, you will know why security is important, why identity is important, and why you don't want to create and run your own identity systems due to complexity and security issues. So if there's any lesson to be learned today, is that we don't want you, our developers, to be rolling out your identity systems because many things can go wrong. So I work for Microsoft. I am a program manager at Microsoft Identity. I work with developers, and my role is to actually advocate about security and help you write better and more secure software. And if you like what you see today, if you're interested in security, then we do have a bi-weekly stream. We go on Twitch and we talk about identity. We talk about scenarios end to end. It is focused around security, but we work with our MVPs. We work with our community. So if you have questions, if you want to learn about identity, if you want to talk about a subject, then the 45 show is something that we do. So you're more than welcome to check us out. In the past year, we put over 290 hours of video and content on and around identity, including Python, Go, all the technologies that you would be using, and not just focus on Microsoft. However, if you are using Microsoft technologies and the Microsoft platform, then there are some fantastic benefits that I will show you in a second. Now, security is very important, and unfortunately, we're not doing a good job as an industry to help developers be more secure. I know this sounds weird, but even when I was in university, we never really focused on security. And I still believe that most of the universities out there don't teach security. So people go in the field without knowing some fundamentals. And unfortunately, we throw them in the deep end and they have to learn on the go. Therefore, our industry and our space, it's vibrant with either security issues or security hacks, or every week we hear another company making the news. Just a few weeks ago, we heard that Facebook had a massive breach and 530 million accounts made it to the wild. I was talking to a friend yesterday that lives in the Netherlands, and he said that one of their biggest Amazon-like stores had a massive breach and 3 million user accounts made it out. Somebody was able to hack their database. They got their passwords, they got their hashes, and even they got the salt, so they could actually reverse engineer their passwords. And as you can see, they're not alone in this endeavor. We heard all these different companies from all around the world making the news because one way or another, they were able to screw up their users' data. I'm not sure if you're aware of Troy Hunt. He's a security expert from Australia and a good friend. I met him in one of these great conferences. And he has a website called Have I Been Pwned? And that site actually collates and collects all the breaches from all around the world. He started back in 2010. If you haven't checked the website, I would urge you to go and check it out. It's called Have I Been Pwned? I'm doing free advertisement for Troy, but it is a fantastic service that he offers out there because you can go and put your email address and figure out whether your account has ever been breached in any of the sites, on the 100 sites. Now, the scary figures here are the 10 billion unique accounts that have made it to the wild. These are 10 billion accounts that were hacked from different websites all around the world. And that's 113,000 different dumps of those databases that were managed to be acquired by hackers. Cyber attacks have grown significantly. And in 2016, we had a loss of about $500 million. Right now, that figure is nearly at 1 billion. So in 5 years, the loss of business, the loss of the cost of cyber attacks has grown to double. It's a $1 billion business here. And it's not your script kiddies anymore that will download the script and try to run it. It's not random people trying to reverse engineer it. We're talking about organized crime. We're talking about organized cyber attackers that we will use tools and means to try to hack your sites. Therefore, anything that you put in the public domain becomes a liability. Anything that you put out there becomes a problem. Now, it's not just the security side of things, and I think that's important, but there are also a lot more other things that make identity a complex topic. I've worked with a lot of companies over the years where they chose to use Mongo or SQL or some other database to store their users' information. And that is fine. If you're a small business with 10 users and you want to manage that, then that's fine. Although I will still encourage you not to do it. But as businesses grow, those databases grow. And they actually have multiple instances of those databases spread around your organization. I worked in a large bank where they had tens of databases where different users were stored or user information was stored. And they were scrambling to figure out where those databases were. The other problem with that is that you don't have a central place to manage your users. Therefore, if I were to leave, let's say I work for a bank and I leave that bank. Now, they have so many different places that I have to go and figure out where my account was used. And in many cases, they won't find all those accounts. And I've been in companies where people that had left 2 years ago still had access to production systems in the wild. They could log in to their old job, their old websites, and manage them as if they were admins, because it is very, very hard to manage identities in that kind of system. The other issues with managing your own identity systems or your own identity databases is that they don't scale well. I imagine you have 1,000 users today, and suddenly your business goes viral, right? You have massive success and you have hundreds of thousands of users now, or maybe 1 million users. How is your database going to scale? to that size. It's a challenge. It's an engineering challenge, and developers don't think about security and scalability from the get-go. They want to build something and they want to move on to the next thing. So there must be a better way, right? There must be a way that we can convince you not to build your databases and help you be successful in the identity space. So let's see. I work for Microsoft, so we have a couple of flavors of identity services. I mean, we have the Microsoft Identity Platform, which is the umbrella of everything. And then we have Azure Active Directory, which is used for organizational accounts or line of business solutions. And then we have Azure Active Directory B2C, which is used for signing in users outside your business or your company. Like your friend creates a forum and you want his friends to go and sign up and create accounts, or you're the next Walmart, the next big supermarket, and you want your customers to come and sign in. This slide doesn't really tell you much other than some big numbers, but the number I want you to focus on is the 30 billion authentications that we do on a daily basis. That's a B with a capital B. And I've checked this with marketing because I wanted to make sure that this was not a million and we, messed up our B's and our M's. This is actually 30 billion authentications that are taking place every day. This is the amount of scale that we're talking about. And S&P 500, the biggest organizations are using identity, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be using it. You don't have to have a million users to use the system. In fact, you can have just one user and you can still benefit from the platform because there are a lot of things that you don't think as a developer. In fact, back in 2007, when I was a young and naive developer, I got a contract to work for one of the UK universities to build them a CMS platform, a content management system. And obviously, since I was so clever, I decided to build my own system. WordPress doesn't have anything on me because I'm a better engineer, right? So rather than take something off the shelf and give them that solution, I was like, I'll build everything in .NET and I will provide you with the best experience ever, because why not? And one of the things I had to do was build the identity provider. Now, back then, there was no Azure Active Directory, and there were very few options from a cloud perspective. So I went and built around the ASP.NET Identity, and you think it's simple, right? You just have a username and a password. I chose my hashing algorithm, so I was storing it securely, and all was hunky-dory. And then I started looking into multi-factor authentication. I started looking into backups. I started looking into scaling. And oh my God, that becomes very complex very quickly. Multi-factor authentication is complex because you need services, you need multiple services, and then you need to also think about what happens if somebody intercepts one of these messages. How do you protect against repudiation? How do you protect against somebody launching a man-in-the-middle attack? How do you protect against a brute force attack to your platform? So there was a lot of complexity. It took me 3 months to come up with some kind of an identity system that I thought it was working. So building it by yourself provides a lot of challenges, and also I don't know if that was ever as secure as it should have been. So we never really put it to the test. We never pen tested that system, but you get the drift now, right? It's hard to build it yourself, and even if you know what you're doing, it takes a significant amount of time. So there must be a better way, right? There must be an easy way to build identity. And today I will show you how you can add identity to your .NET solutions in one line of code if you're doing ASP.NET. If you're not doing ASP.NET, if you're doing classic, ASP.NET Core, if you're doing classic ASP.NET, if you're doing desktop, if you're doing mobile, there are probably a few more lines of code. I can't do it in one line, but I can do it in 20 lines of code. But the whole point there that you as a developer don't have to worry about building the system. It's all about integrating and moving on. Because as we know, identity is not a fun subject. And as excited as I might be talking about identity, I know that most of the developers dread this topic. So today, leaving the session, I want you to feel comfortable about going to your next task and knowing what to do when it comes to authenticating users, authorizing users, and accessing your resources. So now that I've convinced you that you don't want to build your own system, we can go through the questions. Like if you are sitting on your desk and your manager comes over and says, Michael, I want you to go and build this website for our customers, and I want people to be able to sign in. The first thing you're going to ask is, do we have an identity system somewhere on our platform? Have we used it before? Have we built anything around it? The good news is that if you use Azure, or if you already have Office in your enterprise, then you already have a free Azure Active Directory at your disposal. So it's a resource sitting there waiting to be used, and all your users have already been onboarded. That's good. We have an identity system. Now, how easy is it to add it to our platform? Depending on what you're building, it can go from a single line of code and maybe 4 lines of configuration to maybe 20 or 30 lines of code and a little bit more configuration. But the whole point is that it should be super easy to add it and move on to the next task. Does it support or integrate with my platform? We support most of the languages, most of the IDEs. So if you're using Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code, that's perfect because we provide you with built-in functionality. However, if you're using Rider or other platforms like JavaScript and what have you, then we also support you there. We can support you no matter what you're building and what platform you're running on. And finally, and that is the key here, I think that's the punchline. Does it support advanced security capabilities? Right? Okay, so we can sign in the users, but what about let's say multi-factor authentication? You as a developer don't have to deploy anything like that because Microsoft Identity actually does it for you. Your IT admin will go in and switch the checkbox and say all users now require multi-factor authentication. Off you go. Conditional access. Like how do we say how, when, and how certain users should be able to access the system? Now imagine if you want to lock down access to your system before or after, say, 9 to 5. I only want people to sign in between 9 and 5 in the morning, right? To write that logic in your code, it's super complex. To do it in Azure Active Directory, it's super easy. You just create a conditional access policy and you apply it to your application and off you go. It's all configured for you. So again, as a developer, you don't have to worry about that. And then there are the other capabilities that are very, very important. For example, one of the biggest asks and something that we're working on is continuous access evaluation. Once you authenticate someone, how do you revoke access to their system since they have an access token that can live for 1 hour? So let's say I sign into my email and suddenly I receive a call from my manager saying, sorry, Chris, this is not going to work out. Thank you very much. Good luck to your next endeavor. So I'm fired, but I can still access my email for another hour because I still have my access token. So how can Microsoft or any enterprise protect against that? There's a continuous access evaluation standard that it's been worked on. Microsoft is part of that committee. And the whole point there is to be able to issue a revocation for that access token. Therefore, as soon as my manager calls me and says, Christos, you're fired. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Hopefully that won't happen. Hope he's listening. The whole point there is that Microsoft can actually revoke my access token, which means that automatically Outlook will stop working for me. And that is very important because businesses have this requirement. How do we stop people accessing the system once they shouldn't have access? It's not just being fired. Imagine if you have a business-to-business scenario where your business partner has not paid their invoice and therefore you don't want to give them access. How do you stop that access? So all these advanced features are coming to you as a developer without you having to write a single line of code. Therefore, the platform does all the heavy lifting for you. All you have to focus about is implementing this thing. Therefore, the Microsoft Identity Platform provides a lot of benefits to you and your enterprise. For example, reduce sign-in friction. I don't have to sign in on my phone, and I rarely have to sign in on any company website I have to access. And Microsoft has, trust me, a lot of portals and a lot of websites. So single sign-on, the ability to sign in once and then promote that everywhere. The ability to use Windows Hello to sign in with my face and not having to remember my password. In fact, I haven't used my password in over 6 months. I don't even know what my password is. It's some random 64 character thing that I store in my password manager. Please use password managers. I don't want you to remember any of your passwords. Now, accessing organizational data, that's again very important. And once the policies are applied, it's very easy for me to access anything in the organization. And if I need to get permission to access something else, that can be handled by the central system. So there are some SharePoint sites that shouldn't have access. I have to go and ask for access for these things. Complying with IT is very important. So as developers, as we know, we like to move fast. We like to do fun stuff. We like to build things. And then IT comes and says, oh, no, you can't do that, or you're not allowed to do this. The hammer comes down. So with using Microsoft Identity, we allow developers to move fast while IT can actually apply certain policies. We talked about conditional access before. Imagine having to cut access to everyone from Australia. I don't have anything against our Australian friends. I'm just saying Australians can't access our data because we have some issues and they're not allowed to. So to do that in code would be super complex. To do that in Azure Active Directory, it's extremely easy, and that policy gets applied to your application, and therefore you don't have to write any code for that. They will just not be able to access the app because unfortunately they live in Australia. Again, I love my Australian friends, so I'm just kidding. It's just an example. And finally, safeguarding access to your data. I did mention before a lot of breaches, right? So Azure Active Directory comes with a lot of security certifications. That means that storing users' data in there keeps them safe, and using the authorization and the consent framework, it provides this kind of trust between the customer, the end user, and your application, where they only have to consent to data that they want to use in the app, and you as a developer have to ask for that data upfront. So for example, if I have an Outlook application and I ask access to all your pictures, you might say, well, I don't want my email to be able to access my images on my PC, so I'm not going to give them access. Or I don't want my my email to be able to access all my telephone numbers if I'm running on the phone. So therefore, you control access to your data, and then developers have to be explicit about how their data is used. So hopefully I've convinced you by now that we have a really good framework here to start working with. How do you get started? How do you integrate with identity? Let's see. There are two main components that you need to think about. The first one is in Azure Active Directory, you need to go and create an app registration. I will show that as part of our demos, but the whole point there is that you need to go to Azure Active Directory and say, you know what? I am going to use you for authenticating users in my mobile app or in my web app. And this is where I want you to send my tokens. This is where I want you to send the authenticated users once they go through this federated identity process. So the user gets redirected to Azure Active Directory, they sign in. Azure Active Directory will say, well, I can confirm that you are the user that you say you are. Here's a token. Here's a JSON web token that actually provides some basic information to the application. So the application never knows what the credentials look like. All they know is that they get a JSON web token that describes the user and their permissions. And therefore, that's all they care about, which is very secure because that token provides information to the app, and me as a developer don't have to worry about storing or managing any credentials. You can do this app registration in the portal, and we'll use the portal today, but you can also do it programmatically. So if you want to make it part of your CI/CD, if you want to automate that process, you can use Graph, you can use PowerShell, you can use the Azure CLI, anything that you want to use, or even the Graph SDK. So once we do we create the app registration, the next step is to go into our code and add some code. The nice thing there is that we have pre-defined libraries or ready libraries for you. If you're very new to identity, we always recommend that you use the MSAL library, the Microsoft Authentication library, because it gives you a standard way for implementing identity on the language of choice. If you're using .NET, then we have MSAL.NET. If you're on a web, we have Microsoft Identity.web, which provides you with everything you need. And if you're building, mobile apps, you have your client, again, built around MSAL. However, we are not really opinionated about which library you use. So if you want to use your own libraries, if you want to use an open source library that has been built around OAuth 2 and OpenID Connect, then you're more than welcome to do so. In fact, we have a lot of samples out there that will use community libraries to help people onboard on our platform. The whole point is that Microsoft Identity is not proprietary, so it's built on top of standards. And then in some cases, you may have to go back to the Azure Active Directory portal to configure some APIs, because your front end may be authenticating users, and then it may need to acquire an access token to go and speak to some APIs. Those APIs could be your APIs. They could be Azure APIs like Storage and Key Vault and Cosmos and what have you. Or it could be one of our first-party APIs like Graph, where you can go and query your data, your Dynamics, your CRM, your OneDrive, your SharePoint, user information, and what have you. And we'll look at the graph towards the end of the session so you can have an idea of what the graph is and why you should be excited about it. This is all we need, right? We got it. We got the app registration. We did it in Azure. We'll do one in a bit. And then you have your code. You download the library of your choice and you make it happen. And then maybe an API if you need to configure that. From an identity perspective, I've already mentioned the flavors, but let's look at them in a little bit more detail. So we have Azure Active Directory, which is used for organizational users. Therefore, somebody that works at Contoso, somebody that works at .next, this organization will need to sign in users for line of business apps, like back office work, some invoice tool or whatever, and you want people to authenticate before they access that. That's where Azure Active Directory is. And then on the other side of the spectrum is building applications for your customers. Now, the same company can have both internal and external facing applications. For the external facing ones, you want people to come in with their own credentials, right? They're not part of your organization. They want to use a password and a username. So at the very basic Azure Active Directory B2C, business to customer or business to consumer, whatever you want to use there for the terminology, allows people that are not part of your organization or part of your business to come in and sign up and sign into your application. So if you're the next Costco, the next Walmart, you can actually sign in users and they can come and buy your products. But the nice thing about B2C is that it actually integrates with a lot of other identity providers as well. So they can bring their own social media account logins. They don't have to actually create a new account. And we know lots of people don't like to create username and passwords for every new database that every new website that they visit. So they might say, I want to sign in with my Facebook account. And therefore, we allow you to integrate there. But it extends way beyond the built-in social media providers. So you can use any OpenID Connect provider. So if you have, so for example, the other day, I did a sample or a demo using Twitch, the streaming platform, to actually sign in to B2C and sign in users and get their B2C access token so we can do something with B2C. Therefore, it's a very extensible platform. And finally, I don't want to spend too much time on standards. We could be spending hours talking about OAuth 2 and OpenID Connect, but I don't want you to worry about standards because what we give you here is a platform built on top of the standards. And when you get your ID token, when you authenticate a user, you use OpenID Connect. And when you get an access token, you use OAuth 2 behind the scenes, and you don't have to worry about that. And then enterprise apps can also integrate with SAML and what have you. So let's not spend too much time talking about tokens and standards. If you want to learn more about these, then feel free to follow me around and see me on Twitter or Twitch. But I know that most of the developers don't want to spend 3 weeks or 3 months learning the inside outs of OAuth 2 and how the flows work. They just want to sign in users and get their tokens so they can move on. So that's what we're focusing on today. And enough of me talking. Let's go and do a demo. I mean, we're not going to do JavaScript today, although I know a lot of people like to have an SPA with an API behind the scenes. So if you want to do that, let me know and I can do a demo later. But I want to start with .NET because I know everybody loves .NET. I am a .NET developer at heart. I've been doing .NET since 2001. So .NET is where we're going today. You can use .NET 3.1 and later if you want to create web apps with the latest libraries. We announced a new library back in September. The reason for that was if you are building ASP.NET websites or have you been building ASP.NET websites for some time, you will know that maybe up until last year, our story was a little bit messed up. Because in Visual Studio, you could go and say, file new project, and then there was a checkbox for authentication. You would check that checkbox, and it would say, do you want to use Azure Active Directory? And you would say, yes, I love that. And it would create a project, and you could sign in with Azure Active Directory. Perfect. That is working great. That is ASP.NET identity, right? But in many cases, you would say, you know what, now that I have an authenticated user, I want to go and access their OneDrive, or I want them to use that authenticated information to go and access Azure, where, tough luck, you have to now download MSAL and add MSAL explicitly yourself to your solution. And not only that, but you now have to re-authenticate the user within your application to be able to access their tokens. Therefore, it would create a very complex kind of a mixed up situation where you say as a developer, well, I have already authenticated the user. Why do I need another library? Yes, we got that wrong. So we fixed the experience. And now there is a library, which we will see in a bit, that is the Microsoft Identity.web library, which unifies everything. That new library allows you to sign in users in a very simple way, and it also allows you to acquire tokens without having to pull any libraries. So we definitely fixed the experience to the point that now .NET is so far ahead on all the other frameworks that people say, can I have this for JavaScript? Can I have the same for Java? Can I have the same for my Python MSAL libraries? And we're working on that. So if you like what you see today, let me know, and I will go back to the product team and say, you need to fix these for our developers. So what we're using here today is the .NET CLI. So I will use the .NET CLI to create a new project. So we'll say .NET new web app. We'll create a new web app. And then I will say --auth. So you see we added the authentication component into the CLI. It's also available in Visual Studio, and it's also available in other tools like Rider. Auth will say single log because we want to use one Azure Active Directory to sign in our organizational users. And then I will give it a name. We'll name it .next web app because we'll do an API in a bit. And this is going to create the website, and it will actually add the authentication components. But it's not complete. We need to do some configuration. So let's go and look at the project to see what is different in the web app land. I opened the wrong thing. I forgot to change directory. I need more coffee. .next. There you go. So now if I open it, it will be in the right directory. Okay, so this is our project. It's a very vanilla web app, nothing complex here. But I wanted to do this so I can show you the different components that are part of the identity system. So here we have our packages, and you can see we're using the Microsoft Identity.web. Current version is 1.9.2, so I am slightly behind, or our template is slightly behind. I would urge you to actually update to the latest NuGet package once you get it, but for now, we'll use this one. And these two libraries allow you to authenticate and also provide you with the sign-in and sign-out pages that you need when you're building your app. You don't want to have your own controllers. You don't have to have your own sign-in pages. You want that to be handled for you. Therefore, no code to write here. It's handled by our DLLs. Next, in the startup is where we're actually bootstrapping in the middleware our solution. So if I maximize this, you'll see at line 30 and 31, we have the bootstrapping of the authentication where we say, I want to use Microsoft Identity.web to actually sign in users. Now, I know I said it's a one-liner, and this looks like 2 lines of code. So can we do better? Yes, we can. Less codes, more fun. Okay, so services.microsoft, so it's add Microsoft. At Microsoft. Type today. What is my intelligence is not playing with me today. Of course, I can type Microsoft. There you go. It woke up finally. It should be here. Okay, so it's a web app. Let me remove this one, and then I will say configuration. Live demos, you gotta love them, right? And then that's it. That's a single line of code that will say when a request comes in, redirect the user to authenticate, right? And then we have the authorization default policy, and then we have the UI. This is what handles the sign in and sign out pages, right? So that's all you need here. And then I will show you some other cool stuff in a bit. And then there is one more thing, which is in our pages, we have a login. This is still the same login that I had before, but now it's using a different area called Microsoft Identity. And then it just points you to the sign in, sign out actions, which we don't have a controller action for this or a page, but these work out of the box. There's one last step, which is a configuration element. This is where we actually need to configure where our users need to go to authenticate, which tenant, which Azure Active Directory do we want them to go. So for that, let's go and actually sign into my test tenant, AAD, let me see that, let me sign in, aad.portal.azure.com, and I will sign in straight into my test tenant. I will use my, by the way, if you haven't had the chance to create a test tenant because you didn't know about that, we have a free Microsoft 365 developer program. See this here. So this one will allow you to go and sign in with your account, not a company account, your own Microsoft account, your MSA live account, whatever you're going to call it. And it gives you a free, full-blown Azure Active Directory with test data to play around. Therefore, you don't have to use your company's Azure Active Directory to play around and build things. It is fully legit. It gives you all the capabilities that you expect, continuous access evaluation, conditional access, FIDO keys, passwordless, and it's free forever. As long as you use it once every 90 days, then that tenant will continue to renew for eternity. Therefore, you have a full-blown Azure Active Directory in your disposal. And that's what I use for demos, because sometimes you need to be able to sign in as an admin, and I definitely don't have admin permissions on our Microsoft tenant. I can't do that because, can you imagine having access to all that information? Dangerous stuff. Anyway, also I wouldn't be able to run some of our demos, so that's why I'm saying this. So here we have our Azure Active Directory, and in here I can come and create a new app registration. Remember how we talked about app registrations? That's very important to be able to create new app registrations. So new registration, we'll call it .next web app. And then we'll say that we only want people to sign in from our organization. You can also have multi-tenant applications where you create one and it allows anyone with any Azure Active Directory account to sign in. You can also have one that signs in people with their Azure Active Directory and their MSA account or live account. And then you can also have one that only signs people in with their Microsoft account. This is the same account that you use for your Outlook, the same account that you use for your Xbox. And these accounts are actually quite valuable because if you have a personal Outlook account or Hotmail or Live account, it allows you to build solutions that are for consumers. In fact, 2 days ago, somebody reached out and said, can I actually access my OneDrive data in a Windows Universal Platform app, a UWP app, and only sign in people with their live accounts? I said, you can absolutely do that. You can use Graph, and I wrote a blog post about how to do it. So you don't have to just create enterprise solutions. Sometimes you can create consumer apps built around the Microsoft Identity Platform. Now, we're just not going to do anything else here. We're just going to go with the sample registration. So one step so far, create a name. And then in here, let me sign out, let me zoom out a little bit so we can see better. In here, once I'm in my application, then I can go and add the authentication component. This is where we say to our Azure Active Directory who and where from they're going to sign in. So we're going to add a platform, and because we're using web, it's a web app, right? It's an ASP.NET web app. We're going to leave it here and say the redirect URL is going to be HTTPS because we're running locally, localhost 5001, and then sign in OpenID Connect, OIDC. Chris, where did you get this information from? Okay, I'll tell you in a second. Let's check this box. Inside our code, you'll notice that the callback path is sign in OIDC at the root. So I just have to make sure that this one matches my web app. And as long as we do that, our code is going to work just fine. If this information does not match our app, or this information does not match the configuration, what will happen is the users will go to Azure Active Directory, they will sign in, but then again, Azure Active Directory will say, I have no idea where you want me to send the token because the information that you provided to me during the sign-in does not match what I have configured here. Therefore, there's a mismatch of URLs. And the reason why we are very strict about that is because we don't want other people to send a malicious or a malformed URL to try to hijack your tokens. So the tokens always need to be returned to one location or the location that you have provided, because we can have multiple login URLs or redirect URIs. And I hope that makes sense. These two addresses inside your code and inside the app registration need to match exactly. Otherwise, we will not return the tokens to protect you from getting your tokens hijacked. They only can return back to the application that requested the sign-in and has been configured. With that information, I will press configure. And now we need to grab this information from here and go back to our app so we can actually have the application up and running and sign in and test it. So application ID or client ID comes here. That's my client ID down here. Let's paste that. Then inside, we need the tenant ID. That's the Azure Active Directory identifier. So we have that. Let's add it here. The top one remains the same, the V2 endpoint, so we don't have to change that. And then my domain name, the domain name for my Azure Active Directory. So that's cmatskas.onmicrosoft.com. You can have actually a custom domain if you want for this one. And if you want to find out where I got this information from, if I go back to my root and say overview, down here you'll see my primary domain is cmatskas.onmicrosoft.com. So with that, and without any further ado, let's run the application and see what happens. So .NET run will build and run our web app. And if I can type one line of code and 4 configuration values, we should be able to actually sign into the website. I will use this sign-in user already because that's our tenant. Because this is the first time that I'm signing into this application, I am asked for consent. This is brilliant because we need to give the application permission before it can access our data, even if it's just our profile information. Therefore, this one is asking for a basic profile and also asks for the ability to get an offline refresh token so you can refresh our tokens behind the scenes. That's what we're consenting to here. Since I'm an admin, I can also consent for the whole organization. I'm not going to do that. But see, with great power comes great responsibility. People may be asking you to consent for everyone. And once I do this, every other user in my organization won't have to consent because an admin has consented to that. So let's accept this information. And lo and behold, with one line of code and 4 configuration values, I was able to sign in. You saw how easy it was, right? Microsoft Identity.web has made things significantly easier. And it doesn't stop there. If we go back into the code, there are other things that we can do with our code that is super exciting. For example, as I said, we may want to get a token for one of our APIs, right? Therefore, how do we configure that? We can come in here and say, you know what? I also want to enable token acquisition to call other APIs. And with that, we can also provide scopes if we want to. So we can say, I need to have a scope for accessing my custom API, or I need a scope to access the graph. So if it was the graph, I would say user.read, right? Or mail.read to read your emails. Well, just your emails because it's a delegated permission. But let's leave it blank for now. What else do we get for free? You might ask. Well, we get token caches. In the past, you had to roll out your own token cache, and that was a pain because it was a significant amount of code, and you also had to be aware what the token cache is doing and how it works. So therefore, you spend another week learning about serialization and how MSAL works. Now you don't have to worry about that. You can choose the cache that works for your needs. You can have an in-memory one, which is the easiest one when you're testing locally. You could have a session token. So if you know that you're going to have one application running in, say, Azure Web Apps or a VM, just one instance, then you can keep that token cache in your session. However, this doesn't scale well if you want to horizontally scale your web app into multiple instances. Therefore, we do provide you with a distributed token cache. Therefore, you can use Redis, you can use SQL, you can use Cosmos, you can use storage. Anything that actually inherits from the iDistributed cache will work with your solution. So you would have to define it up front in the services and say, I want to use this caching system, and then we tag along and we do that. So let's say we want to use in-memory token caches. But it doesn't stop there. We have more. We have more for you. We can actually add a downstream web API. So here, if I had a service that was calling, let's say we have an API that provides you with weather information, and that API expects you to provide an access token. In my web app, I can create a service that wraps around those calls to call those APIs. So instead of me having to explicitly say, hey, add an authorization header to every outgoing request in this helper class, this service here, I can actually register my service. And if I go to the end, it will say, what is the service name? And then we can inject the token acquisition there. And therefore, every time we call that service and it gets injected into our controllers, you will also get the appropriate tokens provided to the calls. So we don't have to explicitly do that every single time, which is brilliant because I don't have to write code to do that. And there you have it. This is where it goes. And in fact, I could also add Microsoft, I think there's an extension for Graph, which is one of our APIs, as I said before, that allows you to call to Graph directly. It actually injects the Microsoft Graph client into your identity system. So this looks good, but what does this give me, right? You might say, well, okay, we've done this. Now, how do I get a token for my APIs? Let's go and see it in action. Well, obviously, we don't have an API to call to, but if we had one, we could go into our pages. We could go into our, say, index.cshtml, and in here, I could inject my token acquisition class. Again, remember, in the past, you had to use MSAL, you had to download, you had to re-authenticate the user, but now we have an authenticated user, so I don't want to have to worry about that. So let's see how this would work. In here, we could create a private token acquisition token pack there, and this. Using Microsoft Identity Web, you can see that. That's beautiful. Let's inject it here. Token acquisition. And here we'll say token acquisition equals token pack or tokac. Okay. And with that, check this out now. In my on get, I could say our token equals token acquisition. Go and get me a token for my user, and these are the scopes I need to provide in. How awesome is that? One line of code to go and get your tokens. That is insane. It will handle all. It will handle everything. It will handle the getting it quietly and silently from the cache if it's already there. If it's the first time that I need to acquire the token, then it will actually prompt me, and it will bring a prompt to the user to say, hey, do you want to consent for this app to access your calendar information? And as soon as I consent, then it will return the token back, and I can use the token further down the line. So I couldn't be more excited about this library because it does everything for you and even more. So let's go back to slides. So we did this one. Next, I want to talk about platforms and tools and languages, right? And from my perspective, I would love for you to use .NET and use Azure if you want to, but we had a lot of customers, a lot of people that talk to us and say, well, I'm running on AWS and I still want to authenticate my users with Microsoft Identity and I'm using Python. And I'm like, okay, that's perfect. We can help you. So Azure Active Directory is neither Azure or Active Directory. It's an identity service that runs everywhere and provides your users access. I love this slide because it's so controversial. The only thing that is Microsoft here is the identity thing at the very top. Everything else is other technologies, not even Microsoft. Bitbucket, IntelliJ, we're actually working with these guys as we speak to add Azure Active Directory into the toolkit so they can, or you can go and spin up an app registration and add authentication to your Java apps without having to leave your ID and or PyCharm. You know, we like you to use your tools that you're comfortable with. The other thing, we don't care where you're running, whether you're AWS or Google Cloud or DigitalOcean, or whether you're running bare metal, Kubernetes serverless, or traditional IIS with .NET 2, right? We will support you. language independent, platform independent. We want you to be successful and write secure applications. That's the whole point of me being here. But if you are running on the Microsoft Identity platform or the Microsoft platform or ecosystem, then oh my God, there's so many good things that you can do here, way beyond just identity. For example, we talk a lot about secretless applications. How do you access your resources without having to provide any keys or API keys or secrets or whatever? If you are working on Azure with Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code, then we can provide you with the ability to sign into those resources and get tokens to speak to your Cosmos, to speak to your SQL, to speak to your storage without having to explicitly provide the secrets to these resources, because we use your identity and Azure Active Directory behind the scenes to allow you to seamlessly build and run applications against Azure resources without you having to authenticate. It will do it for you automatically. And the nice thing about that is that it works everywhere. It works on your local machine. It will try to find identity that works on your local machine. And when you move to Azure, we have this thing called managed identities that are identities managed for you and provide a context. So if your web app is running on Azure Web Apps, it will have an identity. And as long as you configure that identity to speak to Azure, like SQL or Cosmos, then that identity will be able to access the data, access the resources, and even have RBAC permissions to reduce the scope of those identities. So they can do read only or write only or any permissions you like. And then on the other side, we have Power Automate and Power Platform that also comes together to use the same identities to authenticate end to end. So Power Automate can use Azure Active Directory to call into your APIs, or Power Apps can call into your own APIs by acquiring tokens from Azure Active Directory. So no more secrets. If you are running on Azure and if you are using our tools, then the Azure SDKs provide that seamlessly for you. And I've done many demos before. I can show you some code now if you want to. I won't skip through this one because I don't care so much about this. We talked about OpenID Connect and OAuth. These are the standards that you should be aware of. I don't want you to spend months learning these, but our SDKs wrap around them and they provide you this kind of seamless experience. The signing that we saw earlier on in the web app, it was using OpenID Connect, and acquiring tokens, the iToken acquisition would use OAuth behind the scenes, and you don't have to know about them. And then we provide single sign-on for mobiles. We provide SAML support for bringing your your Salesforce into your Azure Active Directory and have single sign-on across your apps. So we want you to develop using your favorite language, no matter the ID, no matter the platform. We want you to be secure by default. So all developers should know now that they don't have to roll out their own identity services. And we want you to be able to benefit from accessing Azure or Graph or your own APIs securely. There's no reason not to do that. You put something out in the public domain, you know it's going to be owned by someone very soon. So protect your endpoints. From a B2C perspective, we talked about consumer apps. I want you to also be aware that they're fully customizable. So rather than having a mobile app that redirects the user in some web browser to sign in and then they can come back to your application, and that feels a little bit alien and not really intuitive, we can provide with a seamless experience where the sign-in looks exactly like your app. So as you can see here, we have a sample app that actually feels and looks very much like a mobile app. And even though we're inside the B2C endpoint, it actually looks very native to the end user. And that's what we want to do, provide rich experiences for your users. I talked about Azure B2C as well, where you can bring your social media logins, and the fact that it can be used not just for signing in, but also for acquiring tokens to call into your own APIs. So you can have a secure API that is consumed by mobile apps and web apps and desktop clients, all through B2C as well. So it is a fully blown identity service for consumers. And we talked about Microsoft Identity.web. And as you can see there, Marcia is showing some slides on how she can remove a lot of code that you don't need. We can do it in one line. And therefore, if Marcia can do it, Bob can do it too. If I can do it, you can do it too. A lot of questions asked about Microsoft Identity.web since it's so awesome. There are some limitations. You can only use it with ASP.NET Core 3.1 and later. But if you are using the latest, then there are so many added benefits like support for Blazor. And I know Blazor is a very hot topic. I know there are a few sessions at .next around Blazor. So whether you're doing WASM or server, we support it out of the box. We support any web apps and APIs that you can build with ASP.NET Core, and also gRPC and Azure Functions. So all these things are supported with Microsoft Identity Web. Now, if you're on older versions of the .NET framework or .NET Core, or if you're in a different language, then we do give you an official MSAL library that you can use. So you could have, say, Azure Functions that use maybe Python or Node and are still consumed by .NET frontends, or an SPA that runs in the front end that needs to consume APIs. They can all be protected through the same identity service. And finally, if you don't want to use our libraries and you don't like the one-liner that I showed you before and you want to roll with your own code, bring your own OpenID Connect and OAuth2 libraries. In fact, we have many samples that show you how to use, for example, Passport in Node.js to authenticate against B2C, or Azure Active Directory. We're built on top of open standards, so therefore any library will work. I've already shown you a little bit about what Microsoft Identity Web can do for you. The whole point there is that we remove a whole lot of complexity and we abstract a lot of things to allow you to be successful while you're building your web apps. The new library is not replacing the old ones. So if you still want to mess around with your JWT tokens, if you need to enhance the tokens, if you need to provide customization in your account controller and account views, these are still available. We just wrap around them and we don't we hide the complexity. But if you still want to have complexity in your apps, if you still want to have full customization and control, because we're built on top of MSAL and all these other libraries, you can independently we can independently pull them in and you can do what you need. And we saw how it works, and I want to do a quick demo with Graph next, just to show you what the graph looks like. Now, people say, what the hell is a graph and why do I care about it? Graph provides you a unified API to access all your organizational data and a little bit more. So it doesn't work with B2C, it doesn't work with external customers. Like if somebody is external to your application, they won't have access and they shouldn't have access to your organizational data. However, if you are working in an organization, then Graph is used heavily. In fact, most of you probably are using Outlook. If you are using Office 365 and you're using Outlook, there's a very good chance that every time you go to type an email, you get some suggestions. It says, hey, you might want to send this email to your friend, Maria, or you might want to send this your colleague, Todd, right? The whole point there is that Outlook is trying to be clever for you. And it looks at your data and says, you know what? All your emails are going to these top 10 people. And I suspect that as you type your email, you're going to be emailing one of these top 10 people, most likely. So it tries to be clever. And there's a query for that. There's an endpoint on Graph that says, show me all the people that Christos is collaborating with. And that this data changes dynamically. But the whole point is that Outlook provides me with a fantastic experience. And if I go to my Outlook, which I shouldn't be doing that because it's a corporate Outlook, it will say you want to send an email to JP, my partner in crime, or Hannah, who's part of my team, or Todd, who's my manager, because these are the top 3 people I speak all day long. And then if I need to do something else, we'll do a query and find somebody in the calendar and we'll come back. And we'll also bring rich data. It will say what part of the org they belong to, where their office is. All this information is coming from Graph. And you might say, well, you know what? I don't care. I don't use Outlook. I use some random other tool. Fine. If you are a .NET developer, then you probably know Scott Huntsman. And Scott Huntsman did a fantastic session last year at Build, where he was actually controlling the lights in his room based on his status. He could actually change the light and it would be red or green or purple, depending on what his status was in Teams. So if he was in a conference call, then he would turn the lights red automatically. And that was all done by Graph. Graph would emit an event saying, hey, your status has changed. He would listen to that, and an Azure function would send a message to his IoT lights, and then his LED lights will change in the room. So you can do some serious business stuff, and you can do some really fun stuff with Graph, but the whole point is that it is great. So let's see how you get started with Graph, because I know that will be your next question. And I'm not an expert in Graph, but I like to talk about Graph because it's so awesome. So aka.ms, if you never used it before, and then GE, Graph Explorer. This is your playground. You can do any queries you want, and you can do them offline. You don't have to be signed in. We will still give you data, or you can be signed into your Active Directory, and then it will pull data from you. So for example, if I go into my profile and say, hey, tell me what my profile looks like, then it will actually tell me this. We also have a beta endpoint, and this beta endpoint actually provides with some experimental and new fun stuff. So you see we have what, 5, maybe 10 lines of data here, but if I go to the beta endpoint, check this out, a lot more data. And some of this data can be pulled into the V1 endpoint. So if you say, you know what, we always want to see the job title, which is not available, then the team will bring it into the V1 endpoint. So V1.0 is our GA everlasting GA release. The beta one is the experimental one, and we have SDKs for both. But it doesn't stop here. Let's say my boss comes and says, hey, we need to build something around Graph, and I need you to pull some data out. And how long is it going to take you? I can say, well, it's going to take me, I don't know, 3 days. No, really. We give you the code as well. So as you can see here, not only do we tell you what the API endpoint it is going to be, but we also tell you how to consume that endpoint, which is pretty awesome. So I can say, it's going to take me 3 days. I can come and copy the code here and then put my feet up for the rest 2.5 days, because the Graph Explorer is so cool and gives me that. And we also give you that in JavaScript and Java and Objective-C. I don't know why Objective-C is a choice here, but we support Objective-C and we love our Objective-C developers. So there you have it. And remember how I said about I can pull my manager, which is some random manager here, but I also can go into people and I can say people I work with. Remember how we talked about Outlook being clever and saying, hey, this is the person you work with, or these are the people that you work with. Check this out. There's actually a me people, and it will pull the 10 more common people I work with. It also tells me what kind of permissions I need, and also tells me what my access token is, so I can play around. This tool is brilliant. It can actually change my permissions, and I can come here and consent for everyone in my organization. And it will say, do you want to do that? Are you sure you want to do that? I will say, yes, I want to do that. Give me all the permissions. And that means that I can actually test everything here and then go back into my code, copy that little code snippet, and be done with it. Also gives you a toolkit component for the front end if you want. Check this out. With one line of code, I can pull the top 5 most common people I work with in JavaScript if I wanted to. So Graph Explorer is brilliant. I know we have 4 minutes left, so I'm going to go back and wrap very quickly. So I would say, if you like what you saw today and learn a few things, you should know 2 things. Please do not roll out your own identity services, because they're very hard to get right. And we have over 2,500 people that work day in, day out to make sure that you are secure, to make sure that you add this one line of code in your application and it works out of the box. And if you like to see more of what I said today, if you want to go more in depth, then make sure to follow us on the 45 Show on Twitch, or follow me on Twitter. I'm always open for conversations and chats if you have questions about identity or what we talked today. And the second thing I want to say is that if you are going to use an identity service that is not built in by you, then Microsoft Identity is probably the place you want to be if you are a .NET developer. So thank you very much. I know we have a few minutes left for questions, so I will see if there's anything there to talk about. Do we have any questions?
Talk. It was really interesting. Actually, you kept answering some of the questions that were incoming. So one of them was, is there a MCL version for JavaScript, TypeScript? And there was a slide devoted to that. So yeah, we can go further. There's also a question. So you've shown how to create the web app with the template.
Yes.
Can that be created out of Visual Studio? Is it already there?
Well, it's built into Visual Studio, and we're actually improving the experience in Visual Studio in 16.10, which is the next iteration of Visual Studio. We will go one step further and not only bootstrap the code, but we will also configure the app registration for you. So you could be able to say, file new project, add authentication, and then press F5, and it will run. So right now, it did half of the work. It did I give you the code, but you have to configure the operating system. You have to go into the Azure portal to do that. So Visual Studio will provide you this experience. Visual Studio Code, we're working on an extension to do that for you as well. So in Visual Studio Code, you'll also be able to go into code, use one of the extensions on the side. One of them will be Azure Active Directory, and we'll do that for you. And for other IDs like JetBrains Rider or IntelliJ, we're also, Rider actually has it. We worked with the team. So since September, there's an Azure Toolkit extension for Azure Active Directory, which does exactly the same thing. File new project, add identity. And for IntelliJ, if you're a Java developer, then we're working on the same thing. So most of the IDs will provide you now with a seamless experience and built-in capabilities.
Yep. And I guess then the next question is about any other future plans. So can you get better than one line of code?
Yes, we can get better than one line of code. I think continuous access evaluation is probably one of the most exciting features that is coming. It still has not been ratified as a standard, so therefore there is no way that everyone can work around it, like OAuth 2 or OpenID Connect. But continuous access evaluation will allow you with maybe a few lines of code to listen to events, and if something changes in your Active Directory and the user should be kicked out of the system, it will do that in your application for you. So this is one of the future plans from an identity perspective or implementation perspective. We're always looking to make sure that our libraries are staying on top of things and are with the latest capabilities, like authorization code with Pixie, which is the most secure flow right now. We'll support that out of the box. Yeah, I mean, you need to stick around and follow me if you want to hear about the latest and greatest. But that, and I think token binding, which means that if you're using a single page app, then we can bind the tokens to secrets, and therefore people cannot steal your tokens and try to play them around. So that's another exciting feature.
Cool.